Yeah, hey everyone. This one's going to be a chat about tools and accessories for a mill. I guess you call it a mini mill. It's not very mini to me, but I think this is they still qualify as a mini mill at this size. I'm doing this video because a few people who watch my channel are starting to buy these, partly based on things that I'm saying and showing about this lathe and my mills and so on. And people often say that buying the device is half the cost. You're going to spend that much again on tooling up. And that's pretty much true. I was aware of this because I saw people say it when I was researching all this a few years ago. And so I did this over a number of years. I bought the tools, had them sitting in the boxes, and then I geared up and I researched, and I'd wait for sales and just order stuff overseas whenever I saw the right kind of deal for the right thing. And then I would, basically it took a long time. And that's because there's no shops where I am. I may be here in the capital city down here in New Zealand, but there's no shops for this type of stuff. So anyway, I can't just go out and buy stuff. So everything I buy becomes researching and then ordering overseas. And so I spent a lot of time doing that, and I thought I would just pass that knowledge on. Now, I'm no expert at all, not even by a long shot in this, but I am an expert beginner, right? So at my level, I know what I've bought, I know why I've bought it, I can pass that information on. Okay, I'm going to start with the Vise. Now, on my BF16 mill, the one I first purchased, which is a smaller mill, I had what was called the Vertex K series, 100 mil. That's about 4 inches. And that was sort of the minimum good engineer's vise that you could get. Anything below that was a drill press vise, and anything above that, the next step up, was actually this one here, the VA series. And so the VK, I think, was plenty good for my previous mill. It probably would have been plenty good for this one as well, but because I splashed out on credit and upgraded my mill, the last thing I did, because of a sale, I went and upgraded the Vise as well, which was quite a big jump in price, about 2.5 times the price to get this Vertex over the K series. The main difference is this is a copy, I believe, of what they call a Kurt Vise. I don't know if those are the original of this design, but those are sort of the high-end American Vises, I think, of this design, and this is sort of a copy of that. The main distinction being that the level down, the K series, this thread pushes right through there. It goes into the back of this vice jaw and pushes right there, which is technically good. You're pushing right in the middle of this thing, so you're not causing it to go off in any direction. Whereas with this type of vise, the thread is down there, and so it's pushing on a bracket or on the base of this thing, extension of it down here. And you can imagine as it goes along, when it clamps something up here, it's got potential to lift. But to counter that, this thing actually pushes on a bearing, which is on an angled surface, and so as it pushes it forward, it also forces it downwards. And I think it's about 2-to-1, the ratio of forwards thrust to downwards thrust. And so that holds this vice jaw against this base plate, which is supposed to be square, and keeps it all in alignment. So that's the point of that. The actual benefit of that is not necessarily obvious unless you've played with these, is that this type of vise, you can wind it out a lot further because it doesn't have to have the mechanism sitting up here behind this. And so you get a full, for the 100 mil vise, you get 100 mil of space here, of opening. If I were trying to save money on everything I purchased, I probably would have stuck with the VK vise for now. Other benefit of the VK series was this handle. You see here I'm using this. That's because I've determined this is a much better handle than the terrible thing that it comes with. This great big thing. Which you shove on there, and then it flops around. It's hard to turn because you just got this ball here and you have to keep spinning your wrist around to turn it. Or if you let it go, it bangs into everything. It's just a terrible, terrible system. And in the jobs I've done with my previous vise, which had a crank that locks on there and there's no folding parts, it's just a crank, almost like this, I could leave it in position, take my hand off it, do something, then go back and knock it. I could even knock it with my arm or my chin or something if I was holding something. So it was very usable like that. And so I planned to resolve this, which I've done initially. I thought I'll take one of these and put it on there, and that's pretty good. I'm going to bend it. I've already checked this one to see if I can bend it. I just bought a cheap one here. I'm going to bend a little piece in it, a little corner in it. I'm going to cut it off, and then that can sit there on there sometimes for certain jobs, and I can just operate it like that for things where I don't have to really get into it. But in addition to that, I got this. I bought an extended socket, one of these, 9/16. Put it on there, put a 1/2 inch bar here on it, and boom. I can use it like that. I can give it a swing, which is nice. So that's a highly recommended modification or alteration from me. It's very good. Now, the other benefit of this vise is it has this drip tray here for catching fluids. The VK series doesn't. The other thing is both the VK and the VA have this swiveling base, which is really nice. You look at it and you think, oh, it's just you're gonna loosen these and the whole thing's gonna be all floppy. But it's not. It's actually sitting on a quite precise axle. It fits very tightly on this axle that's in there. And so when you take it off, there's no movement. It just spins, and then you can tighten it again. And that's quite nice. But on the BF16 mill, which has less height available between the quill here and the base, you normally want to take that piece off. Everyone knows this. You take off the swivel base and mount the vise directly down here onto the bed, and you get that extra inch or more of space, which is nice to have. Here I've left it in one piece for now because there's actually quite a lot of space on this mill, and it hasn't been a problem yet, but I can do that. Alright, that's the vise. The clamps. You've got to get a clamp set. And I had to upgrade my clamp set when I sold the BF16 and got the MH22 because the slots here on the table are bigger. 10s with M8 threads, and I think these are 12s with M10 threads. So the clamping set was sold with the BF16, and I had to get another set. The place where I got this Optimum actually had the real Optimum clamp set here. Well, it's the set that Optimum sells and as their brand, which is quite neat. These usually come in those stands where you see all the bits sitting in. They're always the same. This one came packaged like that, which is sort of nice. Oops. I had to clean, oops. I needed to open that the other way. I also had to clean this quite extensively because of the amount of grease and crap that was on every piece. Now, obviously, these sets let you clamp things directly to the table, and that may be because you need the extra space for whatever attachments, or just because it's something big. And again, if you had the VK series without the wide opening, then you can always clamp something to the bed. So these clamping sets, they're great. I don't really need to say much about them. They always come with all the same parts. They let you clamp stuff down, that's all. And they don't cost that much either. Next thing I want to talk about is the drawbar. Now this matters specifically for the people who are talking on my channels about getting like the BF16 from the local supplier here in New Zealand, which is a place called Machinery House. There's no endorsements in my videos. Until someone sends me something to endorse, there's no endorsements. But I will mention business names just because that's where I got something. Or specifically in this country and in Australia, there isn't the choice. You get these from Machinery House. That's it. That said, I got this from another supplier here who didn't get them from the same place. And so this is a different model, a later model, and there only were 2 of them in the country, and I bought one of them. And there's an important difference with these. There's a big difference between the ones delivered here down under and the ones delivered in Europe. And that's that the quill here is a taper. It's a Morse taper 3 for us. This is a Morse taper 3. So that's a Morse taper 3. The ones that are sold elsewhere have a fitting called a BC or a BTC. It's some kind of a quick release coupling. In any case, down here people use these tapers a lot, these Morse tapers. But one Morse taper is not like the other. So this is a Morse taper 3. And the bit that matters between Morse tapers is this is a Morse taper 3 with a 1/2 inch Whitworth thread or BSW, and that thread in there is what the drawbar screws into. The drawbar is what pulls this piece up into the quill. Well, when you buy a mill like this from Machinery House, the drawbar has a 1/2 inch Whitworth or BSW thread on it. If you buy from Machinery House, it has the Whitworth 1/2 inch thread. If you buy your other accessories, such as these arbors from Machinery House, they will also have the correct thread. If you go to eBay or AliExpress or Alibaba's or Banggood or one of those places online, then it's not going to have that thread. It's going to have a 12mm thread, unless you find one that specifically says it's the 1/2 inch Whitworth. So this is very important to stop anyone wasting money ordering parts from overseas that have the wrong thread. There's a couple of ways around that. Is you can either buy or make a metric drawbar. I have this because the supplier that sold me this mill, and I said there were only a couple in the country, so they brought them in independently, that had the 12mm thread on it. But for the moment, I'm sticking to the Whitworth ones because that's what I've got. And as part of that discussion, when you buy a tool like this that has an arbor on it, sometimes when you get them, they have the option of having the arbor built into the tool. And I'll show you that. So this has the taper part built into the tool. It's all one piece. It doesn't come apart. This one here, you can see it comes apart. There's a screw there holding this head onto this arbor. So you can buy this arbor, which is Morse taper 3, 1/2 inch Whitworth or BSW. You can buy that from somewhere like Machinery House. And then when you buy tools, buy the ones that mount onto that. That's all you need to sort out. And then you can mount your different tools, like say this, onto that. So it gives you some flexibility there. If you go out looking for facing tools like this, you'll find that some of them look like that, where they're all in one piece. Just figure out, be aware of all these issues and decide what you're going to buy. Don't end up wasting money on something you can't use. All right, so that's that point made and remade again. The next thing, and this is very important for anyone who has a mill, you might think you're going to buy one of these and then use a chuck to put all your bits in. You might think you're going to use one of these. So this is a quick release chuck you can use with your hand. Very nice. Very nice. And it's sitting on an arbor, which is the 1/2 inch BSW to, I think it's a JT6. This is straight out of Machinery House. There, JT6. And that goes in there, gets tightened up, and in no time at all, you've only got 3 inches of vertical height there. You've put your drill in there, and you're left with 1/2 inch of vertical space. That's the problem. In addition, of course, these are not that precise. They're not as precise as as what I'm going to show you next, a collet holder. So don't plan on getting a chuck like that. I think you should get a chuck to have for drilling purposes and stuff, and that should be one of these. Just a traditional. So again, this is sitting on a JT6. That's a Morse taper too, because I use this on my lathe. But look at the difference in height between those two chucks. Obviously, there's an inch gained by using this one. So do that. Get one of these. And an MT3 to JT6 Arbor. Now, in place of a chuck, you're going to get one of these sets. Now, when I realized that people were using these and not drill chucks to hold their end mills and stuff, I was a bit disappointed because these are very expensive. And these are called a collet set. Now, there's lots of different collet sets, and there's multiple types of collets. I know that the model is called an ER32. And the 32 refers to the diameter at some point along here, probably the whole thing. And the diameter obviously determines what the biggest hole is that's going to be in there. So the ER32 allows for, in this case, a 20 millimeter rod can go in there. There may be bigger ones for ER32s, I don't know, but this is sort of a full set. Now again, on the website, they give you a couple of options. One set has half a dozen collets, and the other one is the full set, like this. And obviously this costs a bit. Now, I only bought things on sale, so it was a bit better, but still, this was one of those things. Do I really need this? It costs a lot. Ouch. And I decided that was one of the big things I was going to buy. I got the cheaper Vise. I got the more expensive collet set, which was complete. Came with this nice collet chuck holder with the correct arbor built into it, and also comes with the wrench like that. People always love to point out, and I'll do that here because everyone points this out, that when you put these in, you don't just put them in and screw it up like that. You don't do that, even though it looks like you would. You have to put this little edge underneath this offset springy tab thingy. Click it in like that, and it sort of holds it, and then you screw it in. And the reason for that, I'm sure everyone knows, is that you tighten it up, and you really tighten it up, clamps your thing, and then when you undo it, the collet is jammed in there with your tool. It's jammed inside that taper. And so to get it out, you got to wind this out, and at a certain point, that springy edge grabs the underside of this this edge there and pulls it out. So you crack it out like that. And that's why you have to do that. Very important. These are made to fit 1 to 2 size, items that are like here 7 to 6 millimeters. And at 7, it's very tight. It's right at the maximum size of that. And at 6, it has to pull up a lot. So they're best at the 7 size, at the maximum size. But they're very useful, and in the end, I've done every job with these. I haven't used a chuck in there even once, a standard chuck. Not even once. This is used for everything. So I'm emphasizing that you need to get a set of these, and maybe you should get a decent set. A lot of YouTubers get stuff sent by Banggood sellers and stuff to review. And there's a lot of reviews of these ER32 sets because they're very cheap. You can get them for about half the price or less than what I paid for that one. And so people generally don't like them, which is a bit of a shame because it'd be nice if they were cheap. But just be aware of that, and maybe get a set that's a step up from the base level of those collets. ER32. You can also get ER40 or ER25 or something like that, and ER16. There's different sizes. I'm not sure if those were the sizes. But the 32 is sort of the best size for this. I'll just point out here there's also another type of collet called 5C. Now 5C collets are longer. They look like that, but they're longer, and they don't have all those slots cut in them from both sides, from both ends. They just have slots cut in, I think, from one end. And they're a bit like a Dremel collet, which is just a tube cut into 3 segments and then it's trumpeted, and it gets shoved into the hole of whatever your holder is, and it just squeezes down. Now, those are quite popular, but the way those 5Cs seem to be built, if you're not using them at the maximum correct size, if they have to squeeze in, well, it's only logical that just one end of the holder is squeezing and the other end is not. So it's really just holding on one end, and potentially the rod is sitting like that in the other end. Doesn't seem like a great design to me, other than at the exact size of the maximum size of the collet itself. That it would work at that size. But if you get those, you get a different holder up here, and you can also get holders for the 5C collets to go here. I'm going to show you what I've got instead. I decided when I wanted to get these other clamps and work holding things, that because I had ER32 collets, I would get other holders that would use the ER32 collets rather than switch to 5C and start getting a whole set of 5C collets as well. So this is a choice you should make, especially if you have a lathe and you want to use them there as well. I'll show you what those extra bits are. So here's one. I looked for these for a while, trying to get the best, the right ones at the right price, and I got them in the end. So here, what are these called? Collet block holders or something like that. So you can put your collets in there, and they've got that same fitting. And the point of that is you can make yourself a very nice nut or a bolt head, something like that with that. You put your workpiece in there, and obviously you put this in there. You run your mill across it, either that way or something, cut the one side, flip it, and then do the next, and so on and so forth. And these are precise enough to do that sort of work, which is nice. So you can get that one, and get them as a set, obviously. Now in the same vein, now this is actually about the lathe. This is an ER32 collet holder for the lathe. You take your chuck off and you put this on, and this is very nice and precise. Stick it on and you have your work in there. And that can actually go through, which is a bit like a 5C collet. It can go through. So again, because I've got all those ER32 collets, I can use them in all these different places. Right, that's the collets. What about the slitting saw? This was one I had trouble getting a place where I could get a set. I'm at the level here where I'm often looking for sets of things rather than individual items. If I'm faced with a catalog of end mills, here's 200 different end mills, take your pick at $20 or $30 or $40 a piece, I don't know what to do. So with the slitting saw, I could never find a set that was satisfactory. With the Arbor, this was, I thought, the best idea. They had these with tapers, different types of tapers and arbors on them. I could have got a 3. I decided to get this straight one because I can stick it in a collet, which is precise, right? And then this thing's pretty precise, and then the blade is pretty precise, and that would let me use it on the mill and possibly on the lathe if I wanted for some reason, and I wouldn't be limited by that taper. In addition, this problem with the M12 versus the 1/2 inch Whitworth thread comes into it, and if I'd bought the MT3, it wouldn't have fit on the previous mill I had. So I got that one with the straight shank, and that worked very well. There's a video on my channel where I made a cross slide nut for my lathe with it. That was the first thing I did with it. It worked extremely well. One point about these, they come with a key there, which you got to take out, because I thought these would all be keyed, but they're not. They're just circular. So you really just tighten them down and that's it. But you can pull the key out, and the blades sit on there very precisely. They're there. But they only do that in this central area. Just be aware that there's a bit at the bottom where they're not tight, and up here they're not tight either. And if you put all these pieces on, I don't really know why it has all these spacers. Like, when am I going to want to put it there and then there and then there and then there? And, you know, what am I doing with that? I'm not quite sure. But if you just take the nut off and put a blade on it and put the nut back on, it's sitting there like that, which of course we don't want. So you have to at least take one of these off and put it on, and then do that, and then it's tight. So just a point to note. Right, that's slitting saws and a slitting saw arbor. Very nice to have. We'll quickly talk about drill sets. Now, of course, I've had this drill set for years. I use it for lots of things. It's just a mid-range kind of hardware store drill set. The nice thing about a set like this, 1 to 13 millimeters in half millimeter increments. So that's quite a good increase in sizes. So I use this all the time. But in addition to that, with this kind of machining, you're wanting to drill all sorts of in-between sizes. And you can't just buy drills in any size. Certainly not here. But one thing you'll find if you start digging for drill sets is this. They look like this. There's a chart. There's all those. And there's all those. So they're quite an impressive looking set of bits. And they're very cool. I spent an age trying to find a metric set, and I sort of decided there isn't a metric set. It's this. It's always these same sizes. It's called a 115-piece drill set. If you just go to eBay or wherever, Amazon, and look that up, you'll get heaps of variations of this set in different materials, cobalt and everything. This is the cheapest one with this finish, and it's the only one that was available here, and at a sale price it was actually quite a good price. Didn't cost much at all to get all these. And once I realized that almost every size is in there, you don't really need metric, because whatever you're drilling, you just use your digital caliper to set it to one size and then switch from millimeter to inches or back and forth, and you can find whatever size you need. These have these letter sizes, and it has then fractions and so on. There's any kind of size. Now I'm very careful with these, because if I break like that one, I'm not going to be able to replace that one. And so I'm very careful with these. I use them for specific purposes, and they've been great, been good so far. So I like that set. Oops, sorry. I like that set, and they were not that expensive. So between the two, I can get most drilling jobs done, but I also have somewhere these. These are these hardware store cheap sets that you get for 15 bucks or 20 bucks, and they've just got heaps of drills. And so if you're going to be doing something where you need to drill a lot of 2 millimeter holes or whatever, see 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, it's like a cheap set of those, and there's so many you can just wreck them. So that's actually been quite good as well. Means I don't use my good ones for everything. So that's drill sets. Mills. I can get individual end mills, heaps of them. There's catalogs full of them that I can order at prices between like $15 and hundreds of dollars each. But as I was saying before, I like to get things in a set, because I'm in that beginner set sort of level here. This is a Machinery House set. You see these very often, and Optimum sell this as under their own brand name as well. The same set. Now it's a mixture of 4-flute and 2-flute. And I always keep this little bit because it tells me the difference. And the 2-flute can be used for plunge routing if you're actually going to go into a workpiece like that and then across, maybe to cut in and then do a slot. That's what that does, and it's because the blade goes all the way across the middle. Now the 4-flute one is can take off a lot more material, but there's no cutting in the middle. So you can't plunge with it because the middle doesn't cut. It would just stop. And so you use that for cutting into an edge and doing that kind of work, or cutting along an edge or something. You could use both for that, but this has twice as many blades on it, so it's going to work faster and so on. That set's been all right. I haven't wrecked them yet or anything. So they're fine. The only mill that I haven't been able to find for sale or at a reasonable price is what you'd call a roughing end mill. You'll see other YouTubers use roughing end mills to take away a lot of material initially until they get something down to size where then they use the finer mills to clean it up. And I still need to get roughing end mills somewhere. I've not seen a set or an affordable set or even individuals at an affordable price for me yet. So I'm still looking for those. All right, that's mills. Fly cutting. First job I did on my BF16 was to square up the cast iron vise jaw on my bandsaw. That's on a video on my channel. And that was the first job I did on it. And I used this very cheap set of fly cutters. Now these are straight shanks, so they can go into a collet holder, and then it's 3 different sizes. You don't really need all these different ones, you just need one. So this big one, and I had to cut the tool myself. That was the first tool I cut. Didn't get it quite right, but it worked for the piece there that I was cutting, and it worked very well. And so that just sits there and it just cuts across the surface. It's a single blade as it goes around, and these can be used to do quite clean cuts on large surfaces to flatten them out and so on. You've got to be very careful setting them up. Everything's got to be trimmed in perfectly, because as you're cutting around, if it's cutting a little high on one side and low on the other side, you'd be cutting a dip as you move along. So things need to be set up very well for that. Now that works for certain things, but this is the better tool for really getting stuck into the material and removing a lot more material. But you'll see these everywhere. And once again, these Banggood or Alibaba or AliExpress suppliers send these to YouTubers, and they usually send this one with the four inserts. And that's the one you often see. But you'll often see people complaining about them not being precise. And I just took a risk here. And this one came with 2 boxes of inserts. And so one of them is for removing a lot of material, and the other type is for finishing. And so I thought that was pretty good value. And so I took a risk, and then I spent a couple of hours trying to fix this. Because yes, sure enough, you put it down, and it goes click, 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 click. So instead of 4 inserts, 4 cutting surfaces, you've really got, you may have 3, you may only have 1, depending on which one's sticking out and which are not. I did a lot of measurements with this to try and figure out what was wrong, and I did boil it down to one of the teeth. And these actually are adjusted at factory by way of these edges. They can, when they make these, they grind off that top edge and that back edge so that the tool snugs in to that corner. And depending on how they grind it off, that's where the error comes in. So they are sort of tuned like that at the factory. And I had to go, and in the end, one of the cutters had to actually come out by a tiny, tiny amount, like 4 or 5 hundredths, to make it all even. And I ended up trying to shim it, which worked. I have tiny bits of shims, and actually I believe it's still in there. Should still be in there, a shim on the top edge to line that one up. But it was just too much drama. In the end, not very good, and I think you're really taking a chance with those. And so I took another chance. At the Aussie place, they had also quite cheap this 5 insert tool, a very similar one. And something about it just looked better, and it was cheap again. I thought, let me just try that, take another chance. And I did, and that's come back very nice. That's actually quite precise. Oh, and I thought if one tooth is not sticking out far enough, well, I'd still have a 4-tooth one, wouldn't I? So that's worked out very well, that one. And it attaches to that Arbor that other tools I have also attached to. So I'm actually pretty happy with that. And the inserts are the same as the other one. so I can use them. So that's a face cutter for taking away a lot of material on a block and prepping it. Well worth having, I think, because you wouldn't use a fly cutter to take off a lot of material. You'd use that to do your finishing pass or something, to make something flat. But you might use something like this to take off quite a bit of material in repeat passes. With that in mind, the bandsaw, there's a whole series of videos on my channel about the bandsaw, and I keep raving about that because I love that tool. It's very good, and it makes using the mill a lot more fun, and the lathe, because in seconds you can have your part, a piece of metal, cut down quite closely to size and quite accurately. So I really like that. And so this is a boring head, one of these adjustable ones, and of course it came with an arbor, because it has this kind of a screw on arbor MT3 for my mill. And that looks like that. You put your tool in it, lock it in place. You can also put it in that way, like that, or there. And so the idea is this has a carbon tip brazed onto the end, so you can do a tiny hole like that. You can move this thing back and forth to adjust that hole very precisely. You can go out a bit further, make bigger holes. That's what that's for. So it's got an adjustment here, a little adjuster up there, and you make your adjustment and then you lock it all up, lock up the dovetails with these grub screws, and you do your cuts. It's a nice set. I have used a couple of the tools, but I haven't used the actual holder, and but I look forward to using that at some point. Let's get into a few of these smaller bits and pieces. This, you're going to have to get this. And I did make a mistake. I purchased, again on sale with the first purchase of the mill, a set of parallels. So the parallels are to help you clamp stuff precisely in your vise. And you might put something there that you're trying to cut, and then you'd put your piece in. I don't know, you put your piece in on it, and you could do your milling. So they're for just adjusting the height and any kind of spacing stuff. They're precision bits of metal. The first set I bought had, I think, 5 or 6 in it, but they were all huge. And I think 90% of them were too big for this. And by too big, I mean, once you're down to this sort of size, well, that's the height of the actual jaw itself already. So that's not going to clamp anything. Yeah, no use. So pretty much those last 3 are no use, unless I use them for some other purpose. But you've got to get a set where most of them fit below your jaws. And in this case, about 5 of them are actually good. See, that fits in there. And then I could clamp a piece across the top like that, and that would work. So just be aware of that. Next, so that's the parallels. So relating to the parallels and clamping, these things. These are V-blocks. People are always talking about V-blocks. And when you look at them, the affordable ones are really, really tiny. When you look at the measurements, and it says, you know, it's 40 by 32 by 32 millimeters. 1 5/8 by 1 1/4 and 1 1/4 inches. That seems really, really small. And I thought, why am I buying teeny weeny little V-blocks? And then I looked at it and I measured it up and I realized, same as the parallels, of course you want small ones because they fit in your jaws. Your jaws are only 1 inch high or so, and so these sizes are just right. See, you fit that in there, and you could clamp a piece like that, and that would be just right in there. So in fact, these small sizes are quite ideal for clamping things in a jaw like this. These were actually not that expensive. You can get 2 types. You get these machined ones, which look really nice, and you can also get cast iron ones. So they're just a cast iron block that has been machined on the Vise and then on each of those sides, but not on these sides. And those are a similar price for the small ones. These are much nicer, I quite like these. And they do come with these clamps for clamping Like if you clamped this on your table somehow and you wanted to clamp something into it, you can use that. Nice set. I've used these. I'm very happy with those. Centering. These things, got to get a center finder or an edge finder. And they're either metric or imperial. Of course, both serve the same purpose, but it's easier for me to calculate half of 10 millimeters than half of 9.52 every time when I'm working in millimeters. And so these are cheap. I'm going to get a 10 millimeter one of these and just keep this one in the drawer. And the alternative is also this thing called a wiggler. And the wiggler is similar. Again, you stick it in your collet chuck and it flops around like that. And as you move it closer and closer to an edge while it's spinning, it straightens itself out. And just like that other tool, when it's right on the edge, it's perfectly straight. And then if you go too far, it goes plonk and it breaks away like that. So that's what a wiggler is. And there's various tools for inside holes, that sort of thing. There's tips for it. Those are quite cheap. Cheap. Deburring. You're going to be deburring a lot, so count on getting deburring tools. You can just get a deburring tool like an Irwin like that from the hardware store for 10 bucks. And that's nice. It's perfectly good. The popular brand is this Noga. And this is the SP10070 deburring kit. It's a bit of a pain to have to always put the handle in the thing, you know, like that. And almost everything is done with this particular one. And that's been a really good tool. I like that. Countersink bits has been a problem for me. I haven't yet found a Countersink set that I want to spend all the money on. And so I'm currently using a bad selection of cheap ones, cheap hardware store ones, just to try them out. And these have no strength in them. They're very, very weak. I will find a good set at some point. But on the other hand, a counter bore is something I want as well. And I haven't got a counter bore set. That's something I just can't find a nice set. And the counter bore, of course, is drilling out like for this. It drills a hole at a certain depth with a flat bottomed hole for insetting screws. And that's something I'd like to get. What else have we got? These are always fun. Everyone likes to see those. 1, 2, 3, that side's like 1 inch, that's 2 inches, and then that's 3 inches. They come in pairs and they're precisely matched. And these are a cheap pair that I got off the local auction site, Trade Me. And they're very, very precise, these two. I mean, it's astonishing how precise they are. And very useful. You'll see a lot of YouTubers using these for clamping stuff. You can just hold them to create, put something across there. They've got threads in a few of the holes, so you can screw things to them as well. Use them with those clamping sets. Measuring. Measuring is a big one. Now, these are tools I've had much longer, but I've always had a high quality digital caliper, and that's a 200. I think you should always have a long one, a 2 or even a 3 for bigger bits. So a 2 is a nice size. But because I don't want to ruin this one, it often sits in my boxes. It sits in the drawer, and I end up using the cheap and nasty one. These $10, $15 type of calipers that are a dime a dozen. These are everywhere. And these are very precise as well and nice to use. But that millimeter inch conversion is very nice. That's flat. I'm going to have to replace that. The advice there is get a cheap one for general work and for, scoring bits of metal and measuring stuff out, and then get a nice one when you're really trying to get that precise measurement. You got to get one of these for all sorts of purposes, from making tool bits, lathe bits and so on. And this square edge is really useful. You can put it against the face of your chuck. You put it against things there, whereas some of these, they're often round, and then you can't do anything with them. All you can do is measure the angle there. But so that's really nice to have, Look for one of those, a set of nice quality squares, and check them against each other like that, and then also like that to see if they are precise. One of these was not. I got a set of these. And they're decent quality, but one of them was not. I think it was the middle one was off a little bit. And because they're just riveted here, you can actually stick it in a vise and tap it. It takes quite a bit of a tap to do, but I actually tapped these into shape. And so now they're all matching, which is nice. But that was a concern that one of them was not precise. Okay, something else for measuring. What was it? Dial indicators. Now this is something you will be purchasing. One or two of these, if not more. Now these are for doing your fine measurements. This type here, the dial indicator, measures, in this case, about 1 centimeter. Has a little dial there that shows millimeters. It's got 10, and then it's got an outer dial which shows 1/100ths of a millimeter. And it can measure about 1 centimeter. Now, the other type is, let me just bring that over, is the dial test indicator. Now measures a lot less. It actually only measures about 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeters. And I'll just check that. 1 turn and a half turn, not even. About 1.5 millimeters. And you use this for measuring runouts, like on your lathe if you're trying to center something. Or I use it, for example, on the mill here. I can check if my vise is aligned, which I can do very easily like that. Bring the vise over, there we go. Move it this way, and there we go, like that. And then I can go back and forth and see if I've lined the vise up properly, which I have. This, of course, is not permanently attached. It's attached by way of the magnetic base. The magnetic bases are very cool, fun to play with, because of course you switch them on and off. And once attached to a suitable surface, they're very tight. Most machines have some surfaces you can attach to, either there or there, and obviously on the bed. This thing here, you just use a single knob to loosen all 3 joints, there, and there. And I didn't think they would be very good at first because I didn't like the way the whole thing collapses when you loosen it. But it's perfect. You hold this piece, you hold the end piece where you want it to be, and then just tighten that as suits. And you can make smaller adjustments, which I thought would be problematic. So that works very well. I like that. There is also a fine adjustment always on the end here for just that last little bit. And in the case of this type of dial test indicator, the tip here can be moved from its position for different purposes. Okay. Should point out these have a fitting at the back here. These stands there's a couple of different sizes. I think it's 6 and 8 millimeters, something like that. You unscrew that, it slides on this rail. There's another rail up top there where it can also be installed, like that. So it could be used like that. Just be aware that your devices all need to have the same fittings, which normally they will. Another important point about these, if you go looking online, like on eBay or somewhere, to buy this kind of thing, these arm systems and the magnetic bases, what I've seen is they're often not this big. Very often they seem to be about like 3/4 scale. Like the arms will be short here, and the base might even be small as well, but you can't tell that from the photos. Look at the measurements and just make sure that what you're buying is a full-size device like this. There are even bigger ones, but this is sort of the size you want. How good do they need to be? I did end up buying this MX brand, which was a step up. They're not the cheapies, and they're not the Mitutoyos. It's a nicely made one, jeweled and all that, and I upgraded to those from the super cheap one that I purchased. which was this one, which was a bargain. It was like 40 bucks in my currency, or 45 for the dial, the stand, and the magnetic base. And this is this other type of base, which is more useful than it looks. It is useful. I used this on my motorbike in the videos. You can see my videos where I use this for measuring run out on my discs and hubs and all that sort of thing, carriers. And it's actually quite useful. It's not as bad as all that. I did get better dials because I thought this was really a bit jerky, trying to get this thing onto the zero or a position where I could start from, and I just found it all a bit too klutzy. But it's not as bad as it looks. One thing you can do with these is you can unscrew it, stick it in a collet, and use this to tram your mill. And so that wasn't too bad, but I would suggest get something a little bit more upmarket. That's all. What else we got? Tap and die set. The only thing that everyone says is don't bother with the $10 or $20 cheapy sets of taps and dies that I've had plenty of. I still have a set in a drawer somewhere. But I did go out and I bought a nice set. Again, not a very expensive one. It was just a step up from the basic. Good range of both imperial and metric. And that's been very nice to have. I've used this plenty. I'm quite happy with that. Haven't broken any of them. They've been very good. What else have we got down here? Oh, here, this is important. I won't go into the... yes, I will. This was a nice set. And these were pretty cheap. If you go around, these are surprisingly cheap. And you can get away at the start with buying these individually, but I just wanted to get the set and then not be left without. So this is one of these sets of micrometers like this. And obviously I use the small one all the time. This gets a lot of use because you're making stuff on the lathe, you're checking stuff. And of course on my brake discs is where you've seen this being used. And these are very nice. And you can get these sets for surprisingly little. They come with these test gauges that you put in there. You don't have to get the lot, but certainly buying a single like that would be nice. And on a lathe, maybe you'd want one up if you're doing work up to 50 mil or so. Fluids. I want to get on to the fluids. Accessory for your lathe or your mill that you have to have is oil to rub everything down and keep it all lubed. Now, it's almost like asking what kind of oil to put in your Ducati. You get 100 different answers. I think most people settle on to is it 68? I think it is. But the guy who I was speaking to locally, who's helped me out a few times, who's a former engineering teacher, a lecturer at the Polytech, he worked there for years. I told him what my setup was and about the oils, and he said to use 46 hydraulic. That one, any 46, doesn't really matter. And that's what I'm using. He said that the other one is really for big machines, whereas these small machines, this weight is much more suitable. And so I keep that in this bottle, and I use it for everything. Just put on my fingers, rub stuff down, put it in the little oilers. It's very good. And of course that doesn't cost much to buy that at your auto store. Get some of that. If you go through the Optimum user guide, they actually tell you to use weapon oil. So I went down to the local gun shop and with cash, so I didn't get on a list, and purchased this. And Optimum say to use gun oil because it's oxidant free or something like that, and a very high quality oil. And so I actually got a little bottle of that just to, because I thought that's what I might be using. In the end, I'm using that. Cutting fluids. So there's different types of cutting fluids for different purposes. I'm no expert here. I don't know. I don't always use cutting fluids, just sometimes. In some cases, if you're cutting like aluminum or aluminium and you don't want the material to get stuck on the tips while you're cutting, because that does happen. In that case, a lightweight oil like CRC is good. CRC is basically a bit of kerosene with a bit of a light oil. It's a mixture. The kerosene cleans stuff and the oil lubricates. And so those are very useful. Some people even just use kerosene raw for lubricating. This can get used on the lathe because it's quite sticky. Yeah, it doesn't go anywhere too quickly. So that's useful, and I particularly like having, of course, the plastic tip so you can stick it in somewhere. And then there's this kind of cutting fluid, which they don't sell as a lubricant, but as a cutting fluid specifically. And I think these are lightweight. They're much lighter. It's more like a water. I have used it a few times. Didn't really notice any difference, but I've used that. The next step up from this would be coolant. So coolant is a different thing again. Coolant is just water with something mixed into it to try and stop it rusting your machinery. So that's where I've got to with lubricants so far. It's been fine with that. If anyone has any ideas or advice on what else I should use, let me know. That's fluids. Now this thing here, took me forever to find this, because although I can find a jumbo black marker or a red one, I haven't been able to find blue ones for ages. And I finally found in a dollar shop, they had heaps of them for like $1. And so I bought several of these, and I keep one there. You'll see people use these instead of the engineer's blue, because it's just quicker and easier to quickly draw that on your part, scribe a line, and then cut to that line. The downside of this is that it comes off very easily with your fluids or fingers. Solvents, it just comes right off, whereas this stuff here is not designed to come off. Once you put it on and you let it dry out, you can score it and scribe it, and it'll stay on until you probably use acetone or something to get it off. Scribes, these little carbon tipped scribes, you can get those at the store, Arbor store. Very useful, of course. And you can get other types like this. This is a double-sided one, which I don't like as much because the other side I'm always sticking myself with it. So I end up using this kind here, the pen. Hammers. Everyone likes to do a hammer as a first or as an early project on their lathe to make a soft-faced hammer. And I do plan on doing that at some point, but there was a sale on, and I saw this hammer. It's a little bit large. You know, I'd like something a little bit smaller than that, but still it was pretty good price. And it came with 5 heads here, 5 faces, which is really nice. So we've got an aluminum one, a stainless steel one, it's quite heavy, and this sort of a hard plastic. Then there's the soft plastic and the copper. And that's really nice. So I've been using that quite a bit here. Last thing I've got noted here is brushes. Parts cleaning brush. It's meant for, you know, one of those, like a parts cleaning tray. And they look like this, and they've got quite hard bristles. And that's really nice for brushing stuff out. I like that. I always keep one for greasy things, like oily stuff, and I keep one that's clean for other things. And then there's this kind, which is a detailing brush. Again, these are often in the sale bin for like $5. And so the difference here is that it's soft. And again, I keep one for greasy stuff. So I keep that one by the lathe. And another thing that you can't really buy as an accessory, you're sort of going to have to make it yourself, is the screen. Wherever you set your mill up, consider how you're going to protect the room from chips, or just how you're going to sweep them up or vacuum them up. And obviously having some sort of barrier on 3 sides of the mill is going to help with that. I find it doesn't need to be very high. This is 600 high, and it's plenty high. I've used this acrylic, and there's a couple of videos on my channel about how I made that and then modified it for this mill. You could, of course, make it out of anything. You could make it out of wood, cardboard, who knows. But the main point is to keep your workshop clean. You may have noticed that I like a clean workshop. And so that's why I'm saying that. That helps a lot. Doesn't sort out the front sides, and plenty comes out here. but I'm going to be working on that. And of course I do have this unit, which I've kept installed because it does work. You know, I can use that. The main problem is it really is not easy to see through. So it's a bit of a pain, but I've kept that on there for now. Another thing I think that people should keep in their toolbox, maybe a couple of these if you go to an auto parts store and look for a cheap, just a very cheap set of feeler gauges, but one that has heaps and heaps and heaps of gauges. These are metric to suit me, of course. And these I don't use for my spark plugs. I use these for shimming things. So I might want to shim something that's a little bit off. Maybe I need to shim the lathe. I'm actually going to be using one or more in the lathe in another video coming up. And these are I consider these to be throwaway. So if I need to cut them, take one out and leave it permanently installed somewhere, that's what they're for. So if you see one or two of those sets, just keep them handy. It's a lot cheaper doing that than it is to buy shimming material. You see, originally I had this shim stock, and the limitations were the thickness. You only had these set thicknesses, and the price. It's quite expensive. And so now I'm just going to use feeler gauges for that. And one last thing that you really should have on your workspace is lighting. Now this mill actually has a couple of LED lights that can be turned on underneath there, but they're so ineffective. Even if you put your hand up here, you can't even tell when they come on. That's how weak they are. They really don't even light anything. And so I purchased this here. I have these in my office upstairs as well, and I've found them very useful. They've got a big clamp, so that can clamp onto many things. It's quite a big clamp. And it's got this nice gooseneck, and it's very long. It's really quite a good length. And so I clamp it to my screen, point it at my work, and the switch is here. It's a low voltage thing. And as you can see, that's fantastic. It gives me lots of light that I can direct as I see fit. You could have a couple of those even on either side. And I can, of course, move them over to the lathe if I want. Found that really, really nice. And I think that's covered everything that I wanted to talk about. So I hope that helps anyone who's wondering what they need to buy. Like, subscribe, ask questions, all that good stuff. I'll see you later.